Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 39 of my 2022 reads. This week I read a few different books and I had varying levels of success with them. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. First, I finished Null States by Malka, which is the second book in the Sentinel Cycle series. This is a book that I buddy read with Angela at Literature Science Alliance, who I'll link below. We had buddy read the first book in this, Infomocracy, earlier in the year, and we'd both been meaning to get to the second book, and then we just ended up buddy reading it to kind of, prompt that getting it read sooner rather than later. And this book just sort of continues on where the previous book sort of left off, but it follows a different perspective, and it goes into sort of some different areas in the world, and that's very cool. So I really liked seeing the different places that this is set, and this book, rather than focusing on this sort of sci-fi information system that is front and center in the first book, this one focuses on some areas where that information system is kind of lacking. These null states, so states that don't have the information, they're not part of the microdemocracy system, and then also some states that have only recently entered microdemocracy, but they're still struggling to kind of get on board. And so there's some really interesting political discussions in this. It is very much an espionage thriller, so there's some character work, but it's not huge. Most of this is about cool kind of political sci-fi world building and kind of action adventure type of things. So not 100% my style, but still pretty enjoyable. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished Crossroads of Twilight by Robert Jordan, which is book 10 in the Wheel of Time series. My husband, Sush, read this out loud to me. We have been reading out to each other all of the books in this series for the past quite a few years. We both had loved this series when we were younger, but we never finished it, so we're trying to read through and finally finish it. This book, book 10, is a little bit rough. So a lot of people talk about the slog, or a series of books in the middle of the Wheel of Time that are pretty slow and hard to get through. And I think that this book is sort of the epitome of the slog. I found it really, really hard to get through. Although there is very cool world building, and although there's some very interesting stuff happening within the grander story of the Wheel of Time, this book in particular kind of didn't go anywhere. About half of the book was just people reacting to some of the events from the previous book. We were just getting different perspectives reacting to that, and there was a lot of time spent with characters where their character traits were quite frustrating. I don't think that Jordan has the best character work. He has really good world building, but the character work is often very one-dimensional. And so when you spend a lot of time with the character, you're like, yes, I get it. This person has X quality and that determines everything that they do, but it's very frustrating to spend a lot of time in that, especially when you've already seen it in multiple previous books. And there was also a lot of sort of contradictions that got on my nerves in this book, where it would tell you that a character was good at something, so like very good at politics, but then it would show them being very bad at it, and so it was just very frustrating to have that happen over and over again. So this book, even though there were a couple of chapters here and there that would kind of brighten up the reading experience and would be interesting again, there was just such a slog through most of this. So I gave this 2 out of 5 stars, and I'm just really, really glad that Angela at Literature Science Alliance has read book 11 and said that it was much better, because both of us were feeling so disheartened by this book and not sure that we could get through the end of this series. So hopefully the next book will be better. Next, I read Coming Back by Jessi Zabarsky, which is a YA fantasy graphic novel. This graphic novel, first of all, has amazing artwork. I could not get enough of the artwork. I loved the pastel colors. I loved the curved lines. I loved just how many different colors were used. I loved the decorations on the outfits. It was just like really, really gorgeous artwork. Absolutely loved it. And that is definitely the real selling point of this story for me, was the artwork. I think the world building is also kind of cool. This fantasy world. It has its own religion and mythology and things like that, so that was pretty cool. But the story itself was a little bit mixed for me in that I didn't always follow what was going on, and I think that the book was trying to have a kind of meaningful story about these two women who are in a society that is very focused on tradition, and they end up doing some things that aren't very tradition following, and that causes some falling out of things. And so I think that there was definitely some meaning in this story that was there, but it was very confusing, very hard to follow, and it was just not something that really worked for me as a story. So I loved the artwork, and I thought the world building was super cool, but just as a story, it didn't quite cohere together as much as I wanted to. So overall, I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read Elemental Haiku by Mary Soon Lee. This is a poetry collection that I heard about from Rachel at Culinati, who will link below. And this is just a bunch of short haiku, so that kind of 5-7-5 syllable structure for each of the elements. And so it was really cute. There were also some little drawings that were in some of the pages, and there were little kind of descriptions at the bottom of each of the poems with a little of extra information about the elements or about kind of the background that led to whatever was in the haiku. Some of the haikus were actually really cute, but definitely towards the latter half of the table, I think that there was quite a bit of repetition. Many of the poems were just about, you know, half-lives or how difficult it is to synthesize that element, or about the kind of, you know, radioactive issues, these sorts of things. But overall, it was just like a fun little collection of poems that was based in science. So I definitely enjoyed this, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, that is everything that I read this week. If you guys have read any of these, if you're interested in them, or if you want to tell me what you've been reading this week, I would love to hear from you. Just leave me a comment down below.